All right, ready for part 3 of this series? Let's get to it. My name is Aaron, and we are talking about national mythology, especially as it pertains to what the heck is going over there between Russia and Ukraine. And right now, I'm going into the history of the history of the area, and we talked about the foundation of Kievan Rus and some of the legends and mythology that are that are talked about in Russia, that are kind of somewhat known in the West, but not really, because it's not in our history books when we're taught history in school. In fact, this next topic pretty much ignores most of most. I don't think I heard of any of this, except for a very brief mention of, and the Mongol horde went through Eastern Europe and were stopped in like what today is Poland. And and of course there's a lot more to it, to the people who were living there at that time and place. Now, by the 1300s, what we refer to as Kievan Rus had grown to be the largest empire in Europe, outside of the remnants of the Roman Empire, centered in Constantinople. In fact, I think I'm not sure if Constantinople had fallen yet to the Turks. The timing of the various things, it's hard to keep straight in my head. But we have, but the Mongols are coming through, and Kievan Rus is not able to stand up to them. And why weren't they able to stand up to them? They had this big empire, right? However, the guy in charge of it was not a king. He was a grand prince, which meant that he actually had peers who saw themselves as competitors of his. Nobody had really the title of emperor, or, as the Russians would later say, Tsar. This was not this wasn't something that had really been developed. They didn't have the divine right of kings did not appear to be really a thing. You had princes who vied for power, who vied for supremacy, and they were all part of the Rurik dynasty. The guy who was that we talked about in the previous episode, and the fact that it was kind of divided between all these competing loyalties and all this stuff, it meant that they were vulnerable. It meant that they were not able to bring all of their forces to bear. It meant that they were slow to react. It seems an awful lot like what might be happening today, right? Because as several of the podcasters that I listen to like to say, history is a flat circle. Everybody repeats the same mistakes. They were divided just like we're divided, and so political decisions were not made. Political decisions, leadership decisions were put off because they're inconvenient, because, we have domestic issues here at home to take care of, because we're afraid of giving somebody else some kind of a benefit. Even if we can't figure out what that benefit is ahead of time, you don't rock the boat. And that was happening back then. So the Kievan Rus knew that the Mongols were coming before they came. There had been waves of refugees fleeing the advance of the Mongols, and in fact there was an opportunity. There would have been an opportunity for the Kievan Rus to stop the Mongols before they even got to the empire, but the Rurik dynasty was so splintered that I'm not even sure that there was that was even part of the conversation at the time, because nobody wanted to empty their cities out of their local armies in order to fight the Mongols somewhere else, because then that would have left them open to aggression from other princes. This is something that plays out time and time again across feudal Europe, and is a big reason why feudalism didn't survive all that long, because it leaves you so splintered, and centralized governments have their own issues, but generally speaking, when you have a national army that is able to stand up to it, which is actually a fairly modern concept. Most of these groups, most of these countries, most of these kingdoms and empires did not have normal standing armies. They have personal guards, they had elite units that were under the command of local lords, local princes, local kings, whatever. But rarely did you have anybody with an actual standing army. That was something that you recruited and then sent into battle. It's very expensive to keep an effective military force together, and they didn't have a lot of surpluses back then. All of the surpluses that come from automation and all this stuff had yet to really enter into things. So they were splintered, and they didn't have what it took to unite against this oncoming threat. And when they came through the southern part of Kievan Rus, what is now Ukraine, and part of Russia, because back then, because we're talking Belgorod, we're talking, I believe, Belgorod, and especially the city of Belgorod, and Kursk, and then into what's now Ukraine now. And the thing is a lot of these cities fought. They fought and they were wiped out. The cities were pretty much left standing, but the people in them were put to the sword. How's that algorithm? They were put to the sword. I doubt you have that in your vocabulary, so yeah. They were put to the sword. And this happened in Kyiv, the city of Kyiv itself, which was not the capital. The capital was to the north. Kyiv, however, was one of the biggest cities in Europe. Had about 40,000 people before the Mongols came through, and that was equal to any other major city in Europe. It was a preeminent city. It was rich with trade. It was along a major trade route, along a river. It was a major transit for goods coming from the Middle East, what's now the Middle East, and what was then the Roman Empire, going to points north, and that's what had made the Rus so powerful and so wealthy, and but it wasn't the capital, and Kyiv was put to the sword because they resisted. That was the big example that every other European, everybody else said, whoa, wait a minute, I mean, wiped out. There were about 30 years later, there was a visit from somebody from the Vatican came through, and they were like, oh, all the buildings are still here, but there were like 200-300 people there, just basically a handful of extended families. Everybody else was dead. Everybody else had been wiped out, and that was like that throughout most of what's now Ukraine, and and parts further east. Now the cities to the north, they saw this and they're like, okay, let's negotiate. And they surrendered. And that was the big split between what is now Ukraine and Ukrainians and what is now Russia and the Russians. Because the Russians they were given, they were placed under a central administration by the Mongols. Now, so were the people to the south, but the people to the south, they weren't worth dealing with, right? They were very spread out. You had like the rural populations that were left, the smallhold farmers and the people who had run away from the cities, and there weren't population centers. There wasn't a way to effectively administer them, so they just became like so all this area just became kind of a barren wasteland, a wilderness as far as everybody else was concerned. And throughout much of the rest of history, there were at times, maybe 50,000 people across all of what's now Ukraine and into Russia, along that southern tier, and whereas what became the Russians, they surrendered. The noble families were allowed to keep their titles and all this stuff, but when they took off, when somebody inherited, they had to go to the Mongol capital and beg for permission to receive their inheritance. The Russians learned how to be cruel. They learned how to. They came to value only one thing, which was not just toughness, but bravado. Really, that was when this big break began, when this big break happened. Because how could it not happen? Moscow, Muscovy was made the capital of the area by the Mongols, and this just kind of set the stage for everything else. Eventually, the Russians threw off the Mongols. The Mongols basically faded away because a big empire is really, really hard to administer, and empires are never really stable. They fall apart. If you get too many disparate voices together, there is some amount of disharmony. When you have somebody who rules by decree, which is what an empire is, it's over a geographic area that encompasses multiple cultural groups, and it's ruled by one person generally, and their word is law. You have a code of laws, but those laws are overridden by the emperor whenever he wishes. So, and that's distinct from what we view our modern societies today to be, which is the rule of law. That's what we're taught here in the West. It applies to everyone, even the people at the top. In the meantime, the people in the southern part, they kind of melded together. You had the Slavs, you had Mongols, you had people coming up who were from the Roman Empire. You had people coming over from places west, and usually these were people who might have been on the run, who may have had enemies, who may have, and what came out of there, because people will always organize to protect their families and stuff, right? And they developed over time a system of paramilitary society, and these paramilitaries became the Cossacks and there were various different groups of Cossacks, and um, they came together, and the Cossacks in each area, the Cossack bands, they were pretty much democratic from the standpoint of the people within each band would select somebody to lead them, and they were mounted warriors, and they had certain rules, like you had to be Eastern Orthodox in order to be a Cossack. Now, it didn't mean that you had to be Eastern Orthodox to live there, but to be a member of the Cossacks, you had to be Eastern Orthodox. When you were on campaign, when you were fulfilling military obligations as a Cossack, you couldn't drink. They had discipline that most militaries did not have. Heck, that most militaries today don't have. And this made them very effective as small elite groups of mounted warriors. Not necessarily nice because they didn't have all the armor and all that stuff. They were more light horsemen, but they were really good shock troops, and they were really good at doing what they do. And most people in that era, most militaries in that era, were not good militaries. Most of them were absolutely horrible. They weren't disciplined. They didn't drill. They didn't have, they were part-time. They were mostly just peasants and serfs who were told, yeah, you're in the army now. Here's a spear. Go walk that way, and live off the land as best you can. That was the state of warfare at the time. Poland and Lithuania kind of merged together to join the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and they expanded in and took control of the Cossack lands. They made a claim for it because they could, because that's what big countries do. They say, oh, that's our land, and all the other major governments look at them and go, okay, that's your land. We don't care. And so they got these Cossacks, these groups of Cossacks, and they use them against Russia. The problem is that the Cossack society was not built on nobility, right? It was not built on you have to come from certain bloodlines in order to. The whole concept of divine right of kings, which was assumed by most of Europe, was pretty much rejected by them. And Poland, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, had that. They had that perspective that you were born into an aristocratic family, you were born into a noble family, you were born into royalty, and that's just the way it was. And that gave them certain rights, certain stuff. So they started trying to appoint people to serve, people to be. They moved in and basically tried to do a colonization of the area. It didn't work out very well, but they did manage to limit who the Cossacks could be. Okay, here's a list of everybody who is a Cossack. Nobody else can join this, can be a Cossack. If you want to be a Cossack, you have to be born to a Cossack. And that stopped kind of the growth of the Cossacks. And it wasn't like this was something that the locals wanted, but although they were superb soldiers, they weren't very numerous. Remember, this is a very large, depopulated area still, and there wasn't a lot of infrastructure. There weren't a lot of resources there, and it was relatively easy for the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth to just move in with a bunch of soldiers and just plow through everything. You get enough people together, and they can do a lot of damage, and they would just assault the Sikhs, SICH. I don't know exactly how to pronounce that, but they would assault them and destroy them. Be like, okay, point proven. You're our bitches. We're gonna we're gonna go back there, and you're going to do as we say, or we'll come back. And that was how things were for a long time, for a couple hundred years more. And then we're going to come back to next episode how Russia and how Russia uh, the Cossacks reunited. That'll be next time, because it is now 20. We're now running at 21 minutes, which is a little bit over what I wanted to run. And these are, I'm going over this because these are things that are impactful to us today, despite by the standards of the U.S. being ancient history. And not even that, but history we're not even taught, really. We might know a few names. We might know, have a general sense of, Cossacks were part of Russia or whatever. And the fact is they were very different societies, and had always been very different societies from the point of the Mongol invasion. From that point on, their courses diverged significantly, and that split is something that Russia still has not reconciled it with. Anyway, thanks for watching. If you like what I'm doing, like, subscribe. I have a link at the bottom if you want to support Ukraine. There will be a link in the description there to do so. And I'll see you next time. And if you've done something good for somebody in the last week or so, drop it in the comments, because helping one another is a key part to civil society. And I want to encourage that. You have a great week.